anything. There we go.
Can I zoom in?
That's guy filming HD.
Okay.
Stephen Jones.
Do I have to hold my arms up like this?
Talking about reparations. And want to set a stage for the discussion. All right, and so.
Okay, there's talking going on in the room. We're moving forward now.
So the statement I want to set is, besides slavery, 3 centuries of free labor, cotton, inventions that blacks did, such as the cotton gin and other things, the trail car coupler for trains, the rotary engine, the steam boiler, all of these inventions by blacks that were never compensated because they were considered property. We want to also contrast countries that have had reparations, like Germany. Each person, Holocaust survivors, as well as their offspring, today still do get some form of compensation. So I thought the best way to share that, and we had made a PowerPoint presentation and one of our partners dropped out, but we're going to try to do it with just some examples, and we're going to let our partner go first, yes, with his example. And it's okay, you got to stand up.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Abdul Diallo, and today we're going to be talking about reparation, which I don't know nothing about, but I'm here. I try to do my best.
Great start.
Okay, this maybe about my own. What I'm about to tell y'all is something that's very touching and emotional. When my partner right here, Vision, gave me this lecture right here to get ready for this debate, I was deeply touched by these stories that I'm about to read to y'all. As I was reading, I couldn't imagine how black people's lives were back then. I was black people. Right here for this debate. I was deeply touched by the stories and to see what black people went through in that century. Remember, this is just a small portion of what black people had to go through back in the day. I couldn't imagine how their lives were back then. Do I think that black people should get paid for everything that they did for this country? Nah, I don't. But because of the past, I cannot change the past. We cannot change the past. We can't replace the past. But I do think it deserves plenty of compensation. So I'm about to start reading the story right here. Okay, after midnight on October 4, 1908, 50 hooded white men surrounded the home of a black farmer in Hackman and ordered him to come out for a whip. When David Walker refused and shot at them, instead the mob poured coal oil on his house and set it on fire. According to contemporary newspaper accounts, plain of mercy, Walker ran out of the front door, followed by 4 screaming children and his wife. Carrying his baby in his arms, the mob shot at him, wounding 3 children and killing the others. Walker, the oldest son, never escaped the burning house. No one was ever charged with the killing, and the surviving children were deprived of the farm, and the father died defending the land. Record show that Walker's 20 and a half acre farm was simply folded into the product of a white neighborhood. soon sold it to another man whose daughter owns the development land today. In another story, in the 1950s and 1960s, a Chevrolet dealer in homeless County, Mississippi, acquired hundreds of acres from black farmers by foreclosing on small loans for farm equipment and pickup trucks. Norman Weathersby, then the only dealer in the area, requiring farmers to put up the land as security for the loan. County residents who dealt with him said, and the equipment he sold, they said often broke farmers' home administration. No, I'm sorry. Down Charlotte, thereafter. Weathersby friends William E. Strider rented local farmers' home administration. The credit lifeline for many southern farmers, area residents, including Irma Russell, 81, said Strider, now dead, was often slow in realizing and releasing farm operating loans to blacks. When cash for farmers, his family owned to Weathersby, he took the land. The documented 8 cases in which Weathersby acquired black-owned farmers this way. When he died in 1973, he left more than 700 acres of his land to his family, according to the state paper, deeds, and court records. And in 1964, the state of Alabama sued.
You want to say some of those?
Okay, I'm sorry, I understand.
No, remember what side you're on. One of the examples I want to give, I want to set this up. During Reconstruction, blacks were elected. You might have heard about the first Congress, first Reconstruction Congress. We fought during the Revolution, the Civil War, and we were given, some blacks were given 40 acres and a mule. Some blacks took advantage of that. Sherman gave blacks those lands. Those blacks were then evicted off that land by President Jackson, who took those lands back, lands that they were granted, and it was given back to those who committed treason against the country. Whites then used that as a message to go back after the blacks who had gotten Reconstruction. All the blacks in the Georgia Congress got kicked out. Buildings were burned. People's property was taken. That was some of what he was supposed to be sharing. I'm going to share one on the night of September 10th, 1932. Example, 15 whites torched the courthouse in Paulding, Mississippi, where property records of the eastern half of Jasper County, which was predominantly black, were stored. Records for the predominantly white western half of the county were safe in another courthouse far away. The door to the Paulding courthouse safe, which protected the records, had been locked the night before. The Jasper County News reported at the time. The next morning, the safe was found to be open. Most of the records were reduced to ash. So all the records belonging to black people were destroyed. Suddenly, it was unclear who owned the piece of land in eastern Jasper. Even before the courthouse fire, land ownership in Jasper County was contentious. According to historical accounts, the Ku Klux Klan resented blacks from buying and profiting off land and had been attacking black-owned farms, to which he shared that millions of acres today is being taken from black farmers. One example, they built the stadium in Florida with burning houses, lynching black farmers, and chasing black landowners away. The Mezzanite Company, a wood products company, was one of the largest landowners in the area. Because most of the land records had been destroyed, the company went to court in December 1937 with a clear title. Messianic now is believed to own 9,581 acres, said in the court to have been belonging to African Americans. So we're talking about land we're talking about people lynched. And if you look at Nicole Simpson, she got killed. What do? You go after a civil suit for wrongful death. How many blacks have been wrongfully lynched? Not a dime. Not a dime. How many blacks have lost land to this day? Not a dime. Okay, land that your foreparents owned. One more. In the decades between Reconstruction and the Civil Rights struggle, black families were powerless to prevent land takings. Stuart E. what's his name? Tolnay, the writing is very small, I'm sorry. A Washington sociologist and co-founder of the Book of Lynchings, in an era of blacks that they could not drink from the same fountain as whites, and they were whistling, or lynched for whistling at white women. A few blacks dared to challenge the system. Those who did could rarely find lawyers to represent their cases, or judges, according to the Dred Scott case. Black people have no rights by which whites should respect. So, if you got raped, whatever happened to you, your property, or wealth. In 1942, Reverend Isaac Simmons was an exception. When his land was taken, he found an attorney and tried to fight back. His 141-acre farm in Arnett County, Mississippi, was sold for non-payment of taxes, property records show. The farm from which his father had paid $302 in 1887 was bought by a white man for $180. Only partial tattered records from the period exist today in the courthouse, but they are enough to show that the tax payments were paid in full. The minister's daughter, well, let me finish the story, then I'll
Finish that, wrap that up.
Okay.
I'd like to borrow your watch too.
Oh, yes, please. Absolutely. Just push the silver thing at the top to get that piece to go around. Okay. The minister's daughter, Laura Lee Houston, now 74, recently recalled her terror as she stood with her one-month-old baby in her arms and watched the men drag Simmons away. I screamed and hollered out very loudly, and she said, they came towards me and I ran into the woods. The whites then grabbed Mr. Simmons' son Eldridge from the house and drove the two men to a lonely road. Two of them kept beating me. Eldridge Simmons later would tell the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People. They kept telling me that my father and I were smart niggas for going to get an attorney. Simmons, who has since died, said that his captors gave him 10 days to leave town and told his father to start running. Later that day, the minister's body turned up with 3 gunshot wounds in the back, Mr. Macomb Enterprise newspaper reported. Today, Mr. Sims' land, thick with timber, is used for hunting and is privately owned and is assessed to be $33,660, assessed property taxes, purpose and evaluation. This was daily, constantly, that blacks were displaced. And Jews, 6 million Jews died, 150 million blacks died. Jews got compensated, blacks got not a dime.
My name is James Stinson, and of course we're on the county side of reparations. Starting off, we actually decided to break it down into 3 separate sections as far as the reasons why against reparations, accountability, the legality of it, and who would receive those reparations if so were given out. And all the stories that Division shared with us are very deep. They have happened, and there's no denying that those have happened. But as we've said, those in the past and the degrees of legality of when those during that time is in question. Going back to the beginning of slavery, there were 3 major countries that were involved in the slave trade. United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, France, and you know, so it becomes a question of who's responsible. You know, where should the accountability be held? You know, yes, there was a government, U.S. government at the time. They didn't do anything about slavery, but at that particular point, it wasn't deemed illegal at that time. It wasn't legal. It wasn't illegal. You know, looking back now, it becomes a question of course, it was wrong, and of course, it should be illegal because it was treating people as property or as animals as such. But at that particular time, it wasn't illegal. So, how do you punish something that wasn't illegal at that particular time? You know, you can't go back and say, you know, this was wrong, and I feel this is wrong, even though it was widely spread across the country, mostly in the South. And even in some of those countries, in the United Kingdom in particular, even though there really weren't slaves, slavery was actually officially outlawed in England alone in 2010. So even up until this particular point, it wasn't legal. It just wasn't something that was widely practiced. So then it becomes, okay, who would receive those reparations? Ideally, you would think that it would be, you know, most people that support reparations want every black person should get X amount or a portion of, depending on what have you. And just like, again, Vision stated, that because a lot of records and a lot of things were destroyed, it's very hard for people to accurately trace back, you know, their lineage to which slaves and where they came from and how they were treated and, you know, how much work they did or did not do. It's possible through genetics, but that's a process. Are we each individual person going to pay for that process to find out, you know, where they're descended from and the amount of work that they did? So then it comes who pays for that. As far as reparations in particular, the total man hours, ideally, the amount of money that would be accrued for the total back pay, if you will, give you an estimate of over 220 million hours of work. And even at that particular time, if you, even at a compounded interest of 6%, that's well over trillions of dollars. Where's that money going to come from? And why are we going to force the current government and the current populace and taxpayers to pay this money for a previous distant government's actions or inactions for that matter? Again, for something that wasn't deemed illegal at that particular time. At that point, it becomes, this money's going to come from, it could come from the pockets of descendants of white abolitionists who fought against slavery. It could come from, you know, people who may have been of mixed race, who may not necessarily have been completely all black or all descended from slaves. So, and then it falls at that point where reparations are given out for someone who may have a child of interracial relations at one point. You know, are they going to get a portion based on the amount of, the quote-unquote amount of lineage of a black person or that they're descended from a particular slave? You know, how is that going to be regulated? Even at that particular point, okay. So it's about where that money's going to come from, who's going to get that money, and how much of that money is going to get, how much of that money are they going to get. So then it just becomes, it's a lot of it is who, you know, where's all this going to come from? Basically what it boils down to. Even if it's possible, where is it going to come from? It can come from the very pockets of ours. We're all taxpayers. And as also as mentioned before, Vision mentioned about all of the achievements and discoveries and the inventions that blacks have come over the years. As mentioned in the previous debate, you know, it's a question of, okay, we're going to put our money back into our own cities and our own countries and create our own schools and things like that. At one point, we weren't able to do that. Now we are. And unfortunately, that came from slavery, and that came from the steps that we've taken to progress beyond slavery. Yes, we can do that. You know, Tuskegee is a historically black school. It's, you know, it came from personally, I would even say would even come close to reparations would be something like free school. You know, we could provide schools or provide ways for blacks to go to school based on those particular types of reparations. But as far as monetarily, no. That's taking away from people who really didn't have anything. So,
Wrap up time.
My name is Naisha, and I am against reparations. Firstly, reparations are something that are reactive. While we're trying to do something, while we stand against reparations, that's proactive. What we're trying to do is say we're going to not react and beg for something after we've got this horrible thing done to us. No, we're going to be proactive within our communities, and we're going to create an environment so this can't happen again. We're going to make our own inventions. We're going to go to our own schools, and we're going to make an environment so that we can progress and not look towards the past, so that we can get documented in the history books. Vision commented on how other countries gave reparations. Well, to this day, other countries do implore in gay stonings. Other countries do implore in children being raped and women not having rights. We're not talking about other countries today. What we're talking about is this country and how we're going to go forward in this country. And we're never going to do that by pointing the finger at somewhere else. We have to look inwardly. So, again, as my partner stated earlier, we focused on 3 main parts of reparations. For one, accountability. We as people need to start being accountable for our actions as of today. Of course, slavery was a bad thing. It was horrific. No one should have gone through that, but it happened. And you can't keep looking back at the past, because all it does is keep you there as opposed to moving you forward. Yes, you learn from the past, but you don't linger on it, begging for something that the current government cannot give. And even if it were able to give, why would it make sense to give to a group of people who you don't necessarily know if it's factual that they're descendants of slaves? This comes from a professor at University of Michigan. He states that the pursuit of reparations is a respectfully ridiculous pursuit. Through a long-term genealogical investigation of his family, he went through that study, and through this study, he found that the ability of the average African American to produce empirical and irrefutable legal documentation that their particular ancestor was a victim of chattel slavery is most likely improbable. He goes on to state that before the 1870s, via the federal census, African Americans were enumerated in the slave schedules, which only denoted age, race, and sex. In other words, there's no real way to prove that you're a descendant of a slave. And even though this country did import and chattel slavery, and there were tons and tons of slaves that were treated brutally, not every black person was a slave. So then we're also going to go on to how he talked about records being destroyed. It is bad when you have documentation of something and you can no longer prove it. But that's just the thing. When we're looking at the legality of everything, and when we're going at it from a legal standpoint, if I were to ask to have some sort of compensation in any way, I would have to bring document and proof of something that was wrongfully done for me, how it was wrongfully done to me, and provide legal documentation of that. Although it is sad that these documents may or may not have been burnt, the facts are you cannot provide them. So you cannot bring up a case on your emotions and on your feelings and how I feel about a situation. Another thing he talked about was lynching, and how lynching is a bad thing, is very evil, but lynching became illegal in 1965. So anything done before then was perfectly legal. Though we don't agree with it, it's inhumane to do so. In this country, in America, because that's what we're talking about, it was legal at the time. So you can't really hold a country accountable to pay back something when it was legal. If I do something something that's within the limits of the law, you cannot come to me and ask me to pay you for something that I did that was within my rights to do at the time. So we talked about the legality of it, and then once again, I just want to say, who would be making these payments? In this country, in this day and age, we have so many multiracial people because through immigrants, through interracial marriage, through so many things, we have so many multicultural people. Who are we to pick and decide who gets these reparations and when do they get them? When do we become the professor or the doctor of blackness? When do we get to decide? And the moment that you can say that when we get to decide who is and who is not black, because I know plenty of people who don't look black, but they have black parents than I have. So that's my thing. We have to become accountable and move forward to the future. We have to look at the legalities of it, and we have to figure out if you want reparations, who's going to pay and who's going to get paid.
Can we rebut?
Okay, the con side question the pro side.
Hmm? I'll take that question.
Our question to you is, and it's going straight from our main premise, who's going to pay and who will receive those funds?
The United States government, all the descendants of African slaves. All.
Okay, another question, how are you going to prove that you're
This
descendant?
is the 21st century.
Okay, then where would that money come from?
The United States government.
Maybe, but apparently you're saying that's going.
Right now, today, the U.S. is mining out of the Congo gold, diamond, cobalt for your iPhones. 20 million exterminated. This government is doing that. The money is there. Billions in diamonds. Billions in oil. This government is still mining. All the oil out of Iraq, this government is not broke. Bankers alone, when they blew up the World Trade Center, $7.7 trillion. Money is there. You're not talking to somebody who doesn't know about this. They said $800 billion. They said 800 million was given to the banks. 7.7 trillion. I personally fought with this government here when people were losing their homes. Recently, the governor hid over 300 million to help people to save their homes. Put 4 million towards homeowners. This government has money, and this government did it. This is a superpower. Each jet plane, each engine costs $1 million. Each engine. To lock up every prisoner costs $63,000. Each prisoner. This country spends money where it wants to spend money. And it did wrong, it gained off of it, now it's time to pay it back and share the wealth.
So,
I just want to add these things. When I heard y'all say that, how they supposed to know who's black, but my thing is, every person in America is a slave. Every black person is a slave. No matter you married to a white person or not, but as long as you got a black DNA, you're black. So that's how you could tell how, that's how you should tell if someone's black or not. As long as you got a blackness in your DNA, in your blood, that's how it is. So
it's a form of supposed to prove.
every black person is a slave.
But there are black people that really don't look.
But from where? Where can you tell me where black people stay and you're not a slave? Like where? What part of the
We're not denying that there aren't black people. It's not a way to tell black people. And even if they're of a mixed race or what have you, at that particular point does it become okay? Are they entitled to full reparations or partial reparations or not? So because they are considered black altogether, they're supposed to receive these as well. Is what you're saying?
All descendants of African slaves should get reparations, period.
But there are some descendants of African slaves who may not.
No, well, you see, that's the penalty you pay. When O.J. Simpson was being sued in a civil defense, he had to pay. He gave up his Heisman Trophy.
They're going to be the same people that they're going to be the same people. They're those same people. Those same slaves are going to have an issue with.
I don't care what people have an issue with.
But you're fighting for all the people. You're fighting for all of these people, so you should take into account what all of these people feel.
Exactly. Each black United States, whether they, just like the states giving out federal funding, every state don't have to take it, some governments don't. But guess what? You win it in court. There is no statute of limitation on murder, none. That's why each Klan member can get prosecuted to the full extent of the law today, if you know who did it.
So you want
They have people 90 years old being sued. The land that you know is yours, they know these lands belongs to who. I don't care if you don't have the documentation right now. I'll tell you something, the Mormon church has a shit manifest for every person. That's who runs Ancestry.com. There is a manifest for every slave cargo that came to the United States. It still exists.
Okay, so those, by that same token, those slave ships that came from, they came from other countries. So
No, all slaves came through the Middle Passage through one corridor.
But who
All
maintained,
ships.
but what,
And I'm talking about America, because no form of slavery ever existed in the world like it did in the United States of America. Nowhere else.
those same,
Let's continue with the question, response, president, argument, back to
So,
work.
once again, the question is, because what you're saying is really idealistic, there's no real way of finding out who's a descendant of a slave. So how would you go about that? And keep in mind, it does take money to find out who was a slave and when they were a slave and take it back, if it's even possible. So please explain to me how we're going to find out who is a slave, and then determine from that, because whether you're black enough or whether you're not black enough, that's going to determine whether or not you get reparations.
All blacks that came to the United States. Do you know when the first blacks landed? All blacks that came as indentured servants, and on and on and on, deserve reparations. All of them.
but those slaves no longer are black.
Okay, and I said, and the descendants.
But keep in mind,
You're worried about.
keep in mind,
who and
not
how
every black
and
person that
if.
came was a slave in this country. I've been alive 24 years and I was never a slave in this country. I never went through chattel slavery. So all I'm saying is you're asking for reparations in reference to slavery. So please give me factuals and not how you feel on it.
And I would
Explain to
say,
me
and I would say
legally
that
how
even-
we go through the process
and I would
of
say
giving
even
out
when
money
you
to
quote-
these people
even when
and don't just.
You quoted some professor. I don't know this guy's credential, and white people at one time said black people weren't human. So therefore you can quote whatever you want to quote. Just because something was legal doesn't mean that it's lawful. And I tell you simply, Hitler was governing Germany. So it was legal for him to do whatever he did to the Germans. Let me tell you something else. When the United States bombed Nagasaki and dropped those bombs and those napalm bombs, you better believe we went and built Japan. That's why Japan is as successful as it is today with bikes, cars, and everything else. Because the United States had to pay for dropping 2 atomic bombs
That
on
was
Japan.
after the
It
legalities
doesn't
that
matter.
we signed,
It
that
doesn't
we
matter.
will not go into a
Does
country
not
and
matter.
bomb
When
without paying.
When
This
the
was
Middle
after the
Eastern countries,
legalities, so.
when Saudi Arabia bombed the World Trade Center, okay, the United States illegally froze all the assets of Iraq, the 3rd largest oil reserve in the world. They took their money for 3,000 people? It's not going to be one way, because basically what you're telling me is that white folks and every non-black person is worth something. So when John Benet Ramsey dies, you go pay for her. When Nicole Simpson died, you pay for her. But the black chick that dies, oh, she was just chattel slavery because it wasn't legal. No. When did you become human? When white people said so? Or when God made you?
Again, going back to her question,
When
are you
did you
speaking
become the
morally
doctor
or are you
on
speaking
blackness?
legally?
When did you become the doctor on, because this is a real question, when did you become the doctor on humanity and blackness? Because people who were white were also murdered and killed. People who were white in poor, low-income families, they were also killed and murdered. Of course, in the black community, we are going to focus on that. But, sir, please explain to me, when did you become the doctor? Because what you're saying is like your definition of humanity and your definition
Do you know about the
of...
Ku Klux Klan Act and why?
We're talking about reparations, though.
Okay,
We're not talking about
reparations is
feelings.
dealing with the Wall Street.
So after you finish that response, then we'll shift it over, and you can ask questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we
No, now he's responding, and then we'll shift.
Man, I wish I was in the debate. I would have shut this shit down.
Black, correct? Okay, all right.
On black,
She's
he's
gonna
I'm
hear you
black,
say that.
I'm black.
and human.
No.
Okay,
Doctor.
okay.
It's kind of a rhetorical question, really.
It would be, because actually I'm an African American Studies major at Morehouse, and I got the highest test scores there today so far. My GPA is 4.0. I'm not ignorant by any stretch of your imagination, okay? So when you ask me a question about who, blah, 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 you have no idea what I know and what I've read, okay? So what I'm sharing with you is that when you come to me, I have more information than you do. And everybody don't, you know, like.
So now, okay, now we need a person.
Who made me? That's his personal. Who made me?
She asked a question.
She asked a personal question.
But the same
And I'm giving you my credentials to say this is what
The
I
reason why I asked is because you're saying.
I study Egyptology, what's been taken out of Africa, all of that kind of stuff. Who they brought here, and just because you don't know because of your 24 years living here, you've never been shadowed. Don't mean that black people didn't work for this country, that Benjamin Banneker didn't build Washington, D.C., and we built this country with marble, not with 2x4 timber. We built this country, and black people should get something for what they did, for their labor, and their children should benefit the same way that Microsoft children benefit, Ford Foundation children benefit, Emory University children benefit. Black people need to benefit for the blood, sweat, and tears they built this country with.
So
Period.
Okay, so now we're switching sides. Now we're switching sides, and they get to ask questions.
Why do you think black people don't deserve reparation? Why? I mean, okay, give me 5 reasons. Hold on, give me 5 reasons why don't black people deserve reparation.
All right, 5 reasons why black people should not get reparations. For one, is because no one here is the doctrine on blackness. Black exists. Black is a dominant trait. And there are so many mixed races in this country that you have no idea who is and who is not black. To just go solely by someone's skin color and look at them and say, you're black, you're not black, that's actually fairly ignorant to do. And it's quite offensive when you have so many people of multi-races in this country. We are a melting pot. In addition to that, by sitting down asking for reparations for something that you have no legal way of documenting whatsoever. Now, Vish is very passionate about everything he's saying, but at the same time, passion is not going to get you anywhere when you sit down and you look at the facts, the numbers, and the legality of everything. Sure, legality does not make it moral, it does not necessarily make it right, but it does make it legal. And you cannot ask me for something that I did within the laws of this country. Once again, we are not going to talk about Saudi Arabia, we're not going to talk about Japan, we're going to talk about the United States of America. And in the United States of America, lynching was legal, slavery was legal, so I'm not going to give you reparations for something that I did that was completely legal within the limits of my law. So now that we've gotten past this and we're moving forward, as opposed to getting reparations, what we should be doing is teaching one another. As opposed to looking backwards, we should be looking forward and saying, where are we going to go from here? What type of environment are we going to create so it doesn't happen again? And sitting there begging for money from the past for something that happened a long time ago, it does nothing but make you stay static while we should be moving forward.
Any other questions from the...
Questions from this side? Okay. What was the Ku Klux Klan Act about?
Jerk.
Why did it have to be passed?
Honestly, I don't know what the Ku Klux Klan Act was about, but I do know that this topic and this discussion. Can I please answer your question? I do not know what the Ku Klux Klan Act was about, but I do know that this topic is on reparations and whether or not black people should receive reparations in direct reference to slavery. And the Ku Klux Klan Act has nothing to do with whether or not.
No direct reference to slavery. I brought up some explanations, and I said, notwithstanding slavery and 300 centuries of free labor, we're still talking about Reconstruction and the lands, the inventions, the labor after that. You heard me talk about the people who were elected to the Congress, that they got all booted out.
Are we still answering your question?
My whole point is that if she didn't answer what the Ku Klux Klan Act is, it is a part of reparations, it's a part of what happened. If you don't know, okay, that makes me the person I'm black. Do you know what it is? Do you know what the Ku Klux Klan Act is? Do you know what the Ku Klux Klan Act is? Yes or no?
She already said no, keep going.
I'm asking him.
I'm about to answer your question.
Okay.
You referenced Reconstruction a while back. yes lands were given and yes lands were taken
Do
away.
you know what the Ku Klux Klan Act is?
What is this? We've already established that.
So you don't, okay, all
But
right.
I'm speaking to what you were responding
I
to.
didn't ask a question in that. What
But you went off into it in a whole other thing. I'm addressing the entirety of what you just said.
It seems like what you're trying to do
So
is
let's let
say,
him go ahead and answer the question.
I'm just asking you to answer the question, so that.
So it's his floor, it's Hinson's floor.
please, answer.
No, Hinson,
I
person.
didn't answer the question.
Oh, go ahead.
Hinson.
Along with when you were asking about the Ku Klux Klan Act, you brought up the Reconstruction. Yes? Going back to what reparations.
I had to ask because.
No, are you
Are
against
you
it?
Right, but I have to ask because every law was
It's
passed.
Mr. Hinson's floor.
But it's passed for a reason, so I'm asking you, do you know why they passed it?
I'll take it from him.
No,
Because he's not
Just
gonna
relax, it's okay.
He's not gonna let
it's
me
gonna
speak.
be all right. But
All right, any more questions?
You said something about Reconstruction.
But you didn't let me finish.
Go ahead.
You know,
Go ahead.
Go, man. Go shoot. You got it.
Next question. Let's go.
Take a deep breath.
A lot of what you spoke on came from a moral standpoint and from a moral aspect of it. What we talked about before was a reality. No, we do not know what the Ku Klux Klan Act was about. But going back to what we were talking about with reparations and you bringing up Reconstruction, as I was about to say, yes, lands were given and yes, lands were taken away. But a large portion of those slaves that were given, they were given almost $1 million worth of stuff and they left the country. So, again, going back to initially reparations, where to be perfectly honest, I really don't understand. I get what you're saying that you're
Which is
throwing
why
out,
I was given to explain so you could properly understand.
but you would ask me a question.
Yeah, but you're going around the world and bringing
I know.
up figures that have
No,
nothing.
he has the floor. You don't need to explain.
Okay.
You're asking the questions at this point.
All right.
So, you threw out the question of the Ku Klux Klan. We already established that we as a group, do not know what that was. At this particular point, that question was posed, it seems, as to just throw off something that was completely, even though it had something to do with the topic. And a part of what you were saying, you brought up reparations along with your question. I'm speaking on the topic of reparations in the question. What is your next
There
question?
was a hearing.
What is your next question?
There was a hearing.
We'll be asking the question, right?
Right. There was a
And we'll
hearing.
make this the last question so we can move to the next thing.
There was a hearing. Well, hold on. There was a hearing that was brought up to the Senate, which brought about the Ku Klux Klan. And that hearing outlined, just like how you have South Africa and they have talked about apartheid, it outlined all the atrocities that the Klan did. And if you knew why the act had to be passed, you would understand the land, the houses, the reason for the movie Rosewood, all the things that were done to blacks during Reconstruction. The lands that were taken, the people that were murdered. This wasn't slavery. This was when it was illegal to kill black people. The South did their own thing. So this is not taking off reparation. Reparation is not just for slavery. It is also for the things that happened up to now.
Is that a question? Is there a question?
Well,
If that was a question, you were speaking on during the Ku Klux Klan Act that was posed during the times when killing blacks was illegal. At that particular point, you're asking for money.
so you're saying it's still, that's my question, do you think it's still not okay for blacks to be compensated for millions of acres of land stolen? You're saying it's still not okay for blacks to be compensated for their home and their abode burned up, their wives and children being shot up, crosses being burned in the front of their homes, businesses taken from them. You're saying it's still not okay for blacks to be compensated.
I've never said that it was not okay. The issue is reparations. It was from, you're asking for money. Where's that money going to come from? Yes, there were people, the Ku Klux Klan Act, as you said before, it was done in place when killing blacks was illegal. At that particular point, are you going to deal with, when we deal with murder and killing people now, those people are tried and they're put in jail. Yes, there may be a civil suit, as with O.J. Simpson, as you mentioned before. At that particular case, then those people, you go back and you trace those people that killed those blacks, and then you file a civil suit against the descendants of those people. The entire country, the government should not pay for the acts of a few because they not finished, because they decided that they wanted to kill people. As you said, it was illegal, and what was and was not done at a particular time, that was a government of a different time. Right. And
But that's only a.
Okay, so we're gonna keep the process moving forward, because we only have so much time,
Okay.
right? So now we're moving to the next phase.
Okay.
Next phase. In this phase, the audience gets to ask questions of either side. Not to rebut questions, but to ask questions. All right.
Okay, I have a question for both sides. Can I
Pick one side.
pick one side?
Yes.
Okay, this would be for the con, against. Moving forward in today, how can our black young men and women that are being jailed wrongfully, should they receive reparation for time spent suppressed?
Well, let's keep in mind that even though we do have black people that are being wrongfully imprisoned in this day and age, and I do believe that people who are being wrongfully imprisoned should be compensated for that time in prison, meaning training afterwards, but keep in mind they do have programs in place for that now. It's not only black people that are being wrongfully imprisoned. You have Asian people, you have Hispanic people, you have white people who are being wrongfully imprisoned and sent out to the world. So what I would say to that question is, yes, people who get wrongfully imprisoned, they should have some sort of way that they can integrate back into society and be given something for their time spent. But we're really making this a black and white issue when it's not. Today's age is not the same as it was back in slavery. So we do not have, it cripples us to say our black people are doing this, our black people are doing this, as opposed to saying we as people are doing this. We will never get to the point where our children's children won't have to deal with race unless we stop saying our black people, and just say our people as a whole. Because I have white friends, I have Asian friends, and I would never say, oh, well, my black friend got wrongfully in prison, but that white man probably did something. You know? So.
Just to add on what she said, can I add on something?
No, that's not the phase we're in.
Now, I was just gonna
Question
say-
back here.
All right, I got a question for Mr. Visionary. Vision.
Yes.
All right. So, you know that the American Indians receive reparations, right? And you understand that the precedent for them being granted reparations is because the Europeans came to this country, which is their country, and took their country and told them that, you know, the laws that we're gonna create some laws you gotta follow by in your own land. We're gonna use your land. You can't use this land. It belonged to the American Indians, so that's the precedent for why they gave them reparations. I don't understand how you can draw the conclusion that African Americans should get reparations because of the United States government giving them land and then taking it back. When in fact, if you look at it, it's not even the government land to give to African Americans in the first place. It's actually American Indians. How do you feel about that?
That's only one part of that. That's
Right.
only one aspect of it, and I do empathize with the Americans, the original
Yeah.
quote unquote American Indians. The world court
Okay.
trumps any individual country. Right now, blacks could go to the United Nations and file charges against the United States government
Okay.
for mass incarceration, 663% times more likely to be black incarcerated for minor offenses. I'm talking about when you look at the statistics